Catherine the Great, Chapter 4. Paul realized that the significant political and military events that had taken place between years 1745 and 1755 would have been recorded by the government historians and could be found in the official papers. Nevertheless, it seemed that for a whole decade Catherine had concentrated on her household duties and on being a loyal wife to her husband. There were no entries of those years to be found among the papers, among the secret compartments, and no comments about the Empress Elizabeth or the Grand Duke Peter. Nevertheless, it seemed that for a whole decade Catherine had concentrated on her household duties and on being a loyal wife to her husband. There were no entries for those years to be found among the papers from the secret compartment, and no comments about the Empress Elizabeth or the Grand Duke Peter. At last, Paul turned again to an untidy pile of bundles he had pulled from the secret compartment. The earliest he found was dated October 1754. St. Petersburg, October 2nd, 1754. I am exhausted, but happier than I can ever remember. My son is born. He is born last night. 12 hours after the birth, pains first began. What a joy to have a child of your own, especially after all these years. I do not need to be told that Pavel, I have named him Pavel, he is perfect in limb. After the birth, I thought old Dr. Karovich was never going to stop talking, was never going to hand the baby to me. I held out my arms for him and was overcome with a desire to hold Pavel close to me. He is sleeping now here in bed close beside me. I shall protect him and love him as no mother has ever protected and loved her child. St. Petersburg, October 14th, 1754. I don't yet know how I will arrange it, but that witch, Elizabeth, and her worm of a nephew, Peter, will suffer for what they've done to me and to my son. They've taken him. They just came in this morning and took him away. Apparently I'm not to see him anymore. He is not to be mine at all. They will wish they had never done this to me. When the two of them came in, I was pleased to see them, thought that they'd come to see Pavel. She, the witch, held out her arms to hold the baby, and I let her. I didn't cross my mind that she would steal him, and that stupid, pathetic, whining child, who is supposed to be my husband, was grinning away in the background like an idiot. St. Petersburg, December 15th, 1754. These last 2 months have been a torment. I've not moved out of this apartment since Pavel was born. I've been shut up here, or maybe I have deliberately stayed here, licking my wounds. I suppose I am not sure which. I only know it suits Elizabeth to have me out of the way. Now my purpose as a mother to the heir of Russian throne is complete. Either way, I am living like some kind of prisoner. My servants have been taken from me, and I am left with 2 women who seem to be loyal enough from long experience in Russia. I know that at least one of them is sure to be a spy. Anyway, I confide it neither only in the diary that I can hide. It is the younger one, Anna, who told me that Elizabeth has changed my son's name to Paul. Obviously, the witch thinks that she can do as she likes. She will regret what she has done to me. The witch and their nephew hope I will wither away and die. I am sure of it. They have not invited me to any of the palace Christmas parties or dinners. Apparently, I am to be isolated in here forever. It is time I shook off my depression about what has happened. I cannot get any kind of revenge while I stay here in the dark, with no company and no supporters. 1755 will be a better year for me We will see how my so-called husband copes with me when I pretend to be his friend. It gave Paul a strange feeling to see his own name in his mother's diary, and also to know that his name had been Pavel. So many things had been kept from him. These feelings came with a rush of understanding of his mother's character. Political decisions she had taken in the past had often had hard practical reason behind them, but the emotional driving force of his mother's character, what had made her such a determined and deadly political enemy, these had been unknown to him. Here was reason for a lot of her behavior in the winter of 55 to 56. Catherine must have been a very angry woman. The direction her life took then had determined much of Russia's recent history. St. Petersburg, December 18th, 1755. The witch's birthday dinner. I could not have chosen a better time to make my renewed interest into the palace society. When I turned up in the dining room, Elizabeth was startled to see me. No place had been laid for me, of course, but I sat, and a servant immediately brought me a setting without any instruction. I am sure I saw him smile to himself as he brought it. I was carefully to be polite to Elizabeth, and she was coldly polite to me. She is looking older than her 46 years, but it's no wonder. She sits there filling her face with course after course of the richest, sweetest foods, and then complains that she's overweight. Her makeup is so thick and badly applied that I think she must employ a bricklayer to put on her face with her trowel. I noticed that a place had been laid for Peter on Elizabeth's right, but he did not come to the table. At the dinner was the new English ambassador, Sir Charles Hanbury Williams. I find him intelligent and well educated, a pleasure to speak with. I made sure he and I got along well. He may very well be an ally in the future. I must play my cards carefully. St. Petersburg, December 19th, 1755. This morning I managed to have a private meeting with Sir Charles. We spoke of Persian Fred. I had not realized that his aggression had grown to quite such proportions. It seems there will almost certainly be a war, but the things Charles told me about my husband are more disturbing. No wonder Peter wasn't at dinner. He had been strutting and telling people that he supports Prussian Fred. He had been telling everyone how superior the Germans are to the Russians in every way. This is idiocy, but then he always was a fool. It's no wonder that Elizabeth and Peter have fallen out and she is angry with him. She is fiercely Russian, of course. I know that she has promised to help the Austrians since it seems theirs will be the first country Persian Fred will attack. St. Petersburg, December 30th, 1755. It is really very gratifying to be able to talk to someone who has some education. Charles has become a good friend. There is no doubt he understands the way things have here between Elizabeth and Peter and me. But he's always the Russian diplomat looking for information for his masters in England. While he talks to me, he fishes for my views and for information. I am quite open about the way I think about Peter. The Grand Duke is childish and incompetent. I have no hesitation in telling Charles this. But I have found out that I am telling him nothing he does not already know. I am more careful what I tell him about my opinions of Elizabeth. Today he hinted that England would like a defense treaty with Russia, even though the English have been on good terms with Prussia in the recent past. These are very wary about the Prussian Fred is doing. They want some secure friends in the Eastern Europe. St. Petersburg, January 9th, 1756. That husband of mine is beyond any description I can make of him. Every day he manages to find new ways to make a fool of himself. I cannot believe that he has imported a whole regiment of Prussian soldiers. He parades them around as if they were his toy soldiers. He's taken to wearing a Persian uniform too. Every officer in the Russian army is infuriated by his antics. St. Petersburg, January 11th, 1756. I've given up any pretense of being friendly towards Peter. Last night he came bursting into my room, wearing his uniform of course, with all his shiny gold braid and the stupid hat, really. I swear he hasn't got the brains he was born with. To tell me the glorious news that Prussian Fred is on the march and has invaded Saxony. I got straight to the point and told him that if he had any sense, he wouldn't be so keen to see a war coming, and that war isn't all marching up and down with colorful uniforms looking gallant. He seemed to be a bit surprised that I had talked to him like that. He pouted and sulked like a little boy. But I told him what I think of him, and I reminded him that he is heir to the Russian throne. He ought to be caring more about Russia than about Germany. But all he thinks of is his admiration for Frederick the Great, as he calls Persian Fred. He had the nerve to say that he wished the Empress were gone. If he were the emperor now, he would support Frederick even if the Prussians invade Russia. The boy doesn't have the common sense of a flea. St. Petersburg, January 30th, 1756. Elizabeth has commanded her army to invade East Prussia, to strike first. This is a good thing. Frederick's intentions are to expand his territory in every direction he can. Already he has taken valuable lands from Austria. We must attack the Prussians before they attack us. I have no doubt about the Russian army will win. Charles is to leave Russia. The English king has signed an alliance with Prussian Fred. England is such a treacherous snake. The English see Prussia as being the winning side, so they are joining it. Charles and I are still friends, but I trust him less now. As Paul turned the page on the last entry, a letter had been tucked into the binding of the book and fell out. Paul caught at it just in time to prevent its falling to the floor, but he failed to catch another, much smaller slip of paper that had been enclosed within the large gerb. He bent to collect it from the edge of the carpet where it had fallen and read it first. Madam, like you said, I took the Sir Charles' apartment this morning when I knew he was out riding. I could not find any letters or other papers for you. Only this one I took from his desk. Hope please your highness to remind her of small gift she promised her servant Anna for the service your servant Anna. Paul was stunned. He knew his mother had been an astute politician, and he knew that politics was not always entirely honest business, but getting a servant to steal from a diplomat's apartment seemed a particularly underhand thing to have done. He began to consider the depth of his mother's character. What else was there to learn about her? He turned to the letter that had been stolen from the desk. Sir Charles Hembury Williams. Your Excellency, I intend to leave St. Petersburg tomorrow, February 10th, 1757, and on my journey back to England will pass through Holstein and Prussian states to ascertain our positions in those places. The situation in St. Petersburg remains uncertain. For now, the Empress Elizabeth is firmly in control, and although she has political opponents, it seems to me that no faction is strong enough to disrupt her hold on power. Nevertheless, she has aged significantly over the last year. She is never entirely healthy, and her bouts of illness often force her to spend quite long periods of time away from the governing councils and committees. The two minor strokes she has suffered have severely slowed her. It would be no surprise were she to die at any time. Indeed, I believe she would have abdicated long ago in favor of her nephew, the Grand Duke Peter, had he become someone fit to rule. I have reported it on the immaturity of the Grand Duke Peter several times and needed to repeat my knowledge of him here. The Empress does not trust him with any decision making at all, and he spends his days playing with his model soldiers and hide and seek or blind man's bluff with his servants, especially in the gardens of the palace when the weather is fine enough. On the other hand, Catherine, the Duke's wife, is a young woman whom I believe will have a large effect on Russia's future. She is an astute, quick-minded, and has educated herself in history and politics, is trilingual, Russian, French, German, and is absolutely opposed to her husband in every political sense. Her knowledge of Russia, its armies and resources is impressive, as is her knowledge of foreign affairs and internal affairs of other European countries. She goes to some trouble to make friendships from as wide a circle as possible, both inside and outside the Russian court. She has contacts and acquaintances amongst army officers and landowners, as well as the nobility. She is an excellent horsewoman and rides astride as a man does. Altogether, she is a remarkable character. However, she does not have the trust of the Empress, although it is difficult to know exactly why this is so. The Grand Duchess' position leaves her with a few choices about what she can do. In a conversation I had with her, she told me that in the absence of any other suitable successor to Elizabeth, she is resigned to the likelihood that her husband will become the emperor when Elizabeth dies, as she soon must. In fact, Catherine sees only two paths open to her. She could simply accept her husband as a ruler and be part of whatever he chooses to do in Russia, or she could stay separate from him and accept whatever fate he decides for her, probably divorce, exile, and obscurity. For such a strong-minded and intelligent woman, this must be a hard thing to decide, to tie her fate to a fool, or to face complete obscurity and probably poverty. I could not imagine a life for her in Russia unless she remains married to the Grand Duke, but I cannot see that her father would allow her to return to Prussia after all that has happened between the two countries. Elizabeth has officially stripped Ivan of his titles and he remains with his parents in prison. A spy I managed to employ among the prison officials told me that Ivan is going mad because he is kept permanently in solitary confinement. I feel that there is enough popular support for him at court and in the Russian countryside to make Elizabeth think twice before she has him murdered, but not enough for him to ever raise an army to take any kind of control again. This dispatch will be a final from Russia. I am, as always, English servant. Charles Humbury Williams, OBE. Paul knew only vaguely about Ivan, who had been Elizabeth's predecessor, Ivan the sixth Emperor of all Russia, until Elizabeth had got rid of him by organizing some army officers against him. According to Elizabeth's court propagandists, the coup had been entirely bloodless, but Paul knew better than to believe that. There had been one or two assassinations, he was sure. Once again, Paul was surprised and impressed by the austereness his mother had displayed as a young woman. She had obviously made a friend of English ambassador, but had not hesitated to steal from him to find out his thoughts about Russia. Also, with the benefit of hindsight, he could see that Sir Charles could not. That through the years of 1755 and 1756, Catherine had been positioning herself for a move against the throne when Elizabeth died. All those friends and contacts from the Russian court and beyond were not made for nothing, Paul realized. His mother had been clever, calculating, and determined politician. However, he also knew that the Empress Elizabeth had not died until 1761, although obviously Henry Williams and many others, including Catherine herself, had been expecting her to die at any moment. When he turned back to the collection of papers from the secret compartment, he realized that there was almost no material in his mother's handwriting from between the years 1757 and to 1761. Instead, bundles of letters that were tied with a narrow black ribbon and pushed together in piles without a recorded dates or sequence. He chose one or two at random and looked through them. Most of them were invitations to his mother and replies to invitations she had sent for dinner parties and balls, for weekend stays at the country houses, for shooting parties and sailing parties, for weddings, funerals, and baptism. It was to be expected that these would be from among the nobility, but Paul realized it went further. All were from and to leaders of groups connected with Russian army regiments, people who represented large groups of landowners and factory owners, people who control finance, shipping, coal and steel mines, and forests that produce timber suitable for building. Paul could see that his mother had put a lot of effort into making contacts and friends with among powerful people all over Russia. The Bysiriks and the Zagorisks, the Orlov family and their cousins, the Kozlovskis, Princess Dashkov, and many more of very wealthy members of Russian upper classes were represented. Panyan, too, a name Paul associated with political life, specifically the diplomatic corps, was represented. Catherine had been planning a secure future for herself. Yes, but it was more than that. He recalled the words she had written earlier. I do not yet know how I will arrange it, but that which Elizabeth and her worm of a nephew, Peter, will suffer for what they've done to me and to my son. End of chapter 4.